welcome everybody. So today I chose some onions from the kitchen to do. So I'm going to try to do another one sitting painting here. But if you see right through here, you can see the setup I have over here of the onions. They're just set up onto a wooden box there. Okay. So to start with, I always start with a toned surface, and what I do here is, this is actually what we refer to the imprimatura, but it's just basically toning it. So I just take liquid and in this case burn umber and Van Dyke brown and mix it together and do a coat, and then I let it dry. I am painting on board, so when you're painting on board, the surface is much smoother versus canvas. Canvas has a little choppier surface unless you prepare it, so it doesn't. Okay, so to start with, I always look for my composition to begin with. So I want to kind of bring the box in towards the bottom here. I think I am today going to put the box at a little slant. In the past couple of videos I've done, I put the box more or less flush, with the bottom of the board. So try to give it a little bit of a slant this time. A little messy start, that's okay. I put it in too much of a slant, so I'll just straighten that out a little bit. Pick up that excess I put. And I always recommend a little Q-tip here for cleaning up. So I always try to have some Q-tips on the side, so if you make a mark that you're not happy with, you can just kind of go in and clean that up there. Okay. So we have two big onions, and then we have a small onion here. And so the small onion, try to put it right into there. Another thing I should mention, the board I'm working on today is 8 by 10. Actually, I believe it is. So it may be 9 by 12. I think it's 8 by 10. I just grabbed something that was a little bit bigger, so that the onions were a little bit more life size. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger over here. And then we got the big one, the big red onion. Yeah, I've started, we used to buy our onions in bags for quite a long time, and recently I started buying the individual ones at the store, and those tend to be really, at least at the stores I go to, they're really big onions. I don't know, I kind of like them better. They seem to last longer. They're a little bit harder to, you gotta, in our case we put them in 2 containers, once you chop them up and everything, whereas in the smaller onions usually fit into 1 container. So there's things like that are different. But I do like the bigger onions. Brush is pretty dry. So you always want to try to keep a loaded brush. It's always dry to start with, especially when you're working. I'm working with liquid. To begin with, liquid's kind of honey-like, has a thickness to it that can drag the brush. And when you're starting onto a dry surface, it tends to, have that dry brush kind of effect a lot. And so you got to keep on loading your brush more frequently. I'll bring this out a little bit. But once you get oil down, it moves a lot smoother. One of the things I thought to like maybe suggest, like if you're like a plein air painter, especially, this is what we would call alla prima here, but like with plein air painting, you're outside, and you're exposed to the elements, but the light changes, and so you're kind of under the gun when you paint. You have to paint quick. So doing like a daily painting a day is a good habit or practice to, either help develop your plein air skills, or just practice with the color mixing and everything. You're always going to be, or I should say, you're always going to have bad days and good days. Lower this a little bit more. And it's still a little bit too high of an incline. But the point I'm getting at is, what I may recommend is taking either your medium or liquid and covering the whole board before you begin, because that'll help with like this dry brush thing that's happening to me, for one. Because until the whole board is covered with paint, it's always going to have that dry application at first. Now, this has been given a coat of imprimatura, ahead of time already, and that does help when you paint on raw, or not raw, but gesso, just plain gesso. It's very absorptive, so that's even drier of an application, unless you're using like a lot of terps or something. I just personally don't like using terps as much anymore. I used to use them all the time when I start. So I used to create my initial drawing with terps, and I used to work on a blank canvas with no ground. But I was younger. The terps are actually pretty strong. And they get you lightheaded and stuff like that. So unless you have really good ventilation, it's kind of hard to work with them. And I have noticed the older I get, I'm more sensitive to it. And I think that's true for a lot of people. So, so I just work with the liquid, which does have odor, but it's not as bad anymore. Not as much as the terps are. But if you do use terps, to start with your paintings and everything, just try to keep it to the beginning. You don't really want to use terps past, the first layer. The terps, they kind of thin out the oil, and they make it weaker in a lot of ways. So because of that, you just want to, you don't really want to take that and carry it on to additional layers. It can lead to cracking in later stages. So, it's something just to be aware of there. The example I usually give for that is, every once in a while you'll see like an exhibition of landscape painters. It'll be work they did like maybe a year or two ago or something like that. And a lot of them, created the work outdoors or started it outdoors, and they brought everything in and then finished it in their studio. But one of the reason I bring up the landscape painters is a lot of them do have a habit of using the terps, especially for like creating branches and thin details at the end of their painting. So what I found is, whenever I see those landscape shows like that, I'll go around and I look at the canvases, and sure enough, there'll be, usually about, 20% of them will have evidence of cracking on all the tree limbs and all those thin details they were doing with the terps. And it was because they used terps. The terp dries, and then the paint underneath sets finally, which takes months. Oil paint takes months to set, and so once that sets, the top layer had already dried because of the terp use, and thus it it was moving underneath, and then that's how it cracks. And so terps are really only for the beginning, in my advice, but plenty of people use them. It's still taught by a lot of people to use terps. Okay, so I just spilled my brushes. One sec. Okay, one of the disadvantages to recording like this is that you're surrounded by equipment, and so every movement you make, you kind of hit and run into things. Okay, so I have my drawing per se in place. So I'm pretty happy with the composition. The placement looks pretty good. I try to forecast the color of it. These are pretty muted, or not muted, but earth tone based colors. So this is a red onion, and these are two white onions. So compositionally, I think I'll make a good balance. The red will bring you over here, but these guys are much stronger in value, and so it's going to have this visual play back and forth compositionally, and it kind of is in a triangular setup here. So now the question is, how do I want to incorporate the background? Where I'm at, there's kind of like a bookcase in the back, and I do like putting stuff into the background. I don't like just doing these dark scenes, Caravaggio style. So I do like to put elements in the back. And so maybe we will put some books back here and show the bookcase a little bit today. So I'll kind of map that out here real quick. But these will be subtle. They'll sit in the background. I don't want to focus on them. But what it does is it breaks it up a little bit, so it's not just a flat field. It gives it a little bit of placement. Granted, it doesn't make too much sense, having a bookcase behind onions, but the other thing, that's recommended is that at least try to show some depth of space or different shading, into the background, rather than just leaving it a flat tone. So that's highly recommended. Okay, so I'm going to go to, this is kind of a big panel here, so I'm going to go to a little bit of a bigger brush. Here we go. And the background, there are colors. I'm sorry, I had my stick in the way. There are colors that work best for the background, and with the colors that I have here, these are the colors I typically use. I do tend to go to the red and the green an awful lot. Together, they kind of make it a perfect black, but they allow you to go either warm or cool, and in this case I'm going to go a little cooler, so a little bit more red here. So I'll try to go for like that dark, but just a little on the cool, and then I might add a little bit of ultramarine to that as well, and just a tinge of white. And it's really kind of difficult until you test it onto the board here, but a lot of times I have to go back and remix what I did here, just to get everything in place. So one of the problems with the oil paints is a lot of them are very transparent. So when you have a previously toned surface and you put a transparent down, it really kind of looks like a dark, almost like a hole. And they're just, the transparency is too much. So I do recommend adding just a little bit of white to it, which I did. I just added a little bit more white to the mix to make it a little bit more opaque. But for the most part, I do want this background to be pretty dark. I do recommend working back to front. If you work in the back first, it's kind of like an overlap principle. Then the next thing in space overlaps it, and if you do the objects first, you kind of have to go, when you do the background, then you have to kind of go back and fix your objects. Whereas if you do your background first, your objects overlap that, so the marks are overlapping in space. For the first coat here, the idea is just to go fairly quick, block in the local color. Try not to dwell on the details, but be thin. Don't go throwing on gobs of paint on your first pass here. And this is a preferred thing for me. It's not necessarily what a lot of people teach in painting. A lot of people will teach that, to start with your design, your layout. But, be more selective as far as your colors as you apply them on your first pass. If you can, I do recommend trying to do highlights, midtones, and shadows on your first pass, if you can. But it's not necessary. You can always do that your second pass. But one of the ways to think about this is it's kind of like the imprimatura, whereas the imprimatura, you're toning the surface, and the first pass, you're blocking the local color, and in a way, it's another layer to that toning. So, one of the strategies of toning is, especially like in pastel, you don't have to cover everything. So you have a toned paper. The toned paper serves as part of the shadows and the highlights, or whatever the tone is. But it kind of helps, as far as the process. So try to keep that in mind. To mix some more. But I do really encourage not to get caught up in a lot of the detail. It's very easy to find yourself going down like a rabbit hole on certain elements, and in the beginning, it's just not worth it. So there's a lot to do through the process that you just have to kind of focus and try to generalize it in the beginning. So blocking in those books. And I apologize about my, I think the image is bouncing a little bit. I just noticed the camera seems to be jumping here. I have the camera like literally in front of me as I'm painting here. So that's partly why you don't really see me too much. It's close space and I can't really do anything in between. but it shouldn't be bouncing. That's the thing. I have it connected to a whole different thing. So I'll have to look into that. And if you've been following me at all, I am just starting, so I haven't had very many views, but hopefully you can see the improvements from video to video. So far, every video I think I've made an improvement. When I first started, the cameras I had were awful. It's interesting. They're 4K cameras, but they're good for conferencing or video calls and most things. But when you went to add or apply it to like a painting, the camera really couldn't interpret the depth of space with the artwork. And I didn't really catch on at first. I was more thinking about, it being a new experience, and I was editing them and everything. But as soon as I kind of compared them to, what other people had and stuff, it was obvious how bad the quality was. So I invested into another camera, and so I got that. And then, so I went to a DSL camera, or was it DSLR or whatever, but more like a traditional camera that's hooked up to the computer, and this has been working out a lot better. But then there's complications with that, and so I just, for this one, all the paintings I've done with this camera so far, I've been using the autofocus, and the pictures were slightly out of focus. They felt kind of blurry, but yet at the same time they weren't. It was just kind of like, it seemed like low quality, and this, the image quality on this camera is actually pretty decent. So tonight I have it in manual mode, because I think what was happening is it was automatically trying to focus too much, and it was focusing the shelf really more than the painting. So the shelf was always in pristine, view in all the videos, and so now we're going with this and see what happens. But it's a process, as they say. It takes time. Okay, so let's see here. A little bit more yellow. Some white. The plan is, to make these videos to begin with. Really, I don't want to get like too involved as far as, as I see some of these people on YouTube. I just want to keep it simple and just record paintings and comment on it while I work. Most of the paintings I do on this channel are going to be, or drawings. I plan on doing some drawings as well. But they'll be relatively quickly done. So for me, they've been about 3 hours, 2 to 3 hours. And it's just going through the stages, so the format will be fairly similar for each one of these, and then the idea is to do a recording, or not a recording, but edit it so that there's a quick version as well that will accompany it online. So for those that just want to kind of visually see everything, quickly, they'll have that option. But just kind of keep it like that. In that way, I can hopefully give people insight as far as process. But just, in most cases, things like just basic color theory, working in composition, things to think about when you are working There's a lot of little things in painting that go a long way when it comes to how you approach things. And I feel I have a lot of experience. I don't actually, I don't usually work this way that you're seeing. This is, things that are done in one sitting, or, I have done these in the past, for, I usually thought of it more as practice. Um, but, for me, it's more of the traditional painting that I like. And over the recent years, I've been working with, well, I mean, how can I word this? I've always worked with traditional layering and glazes and detail work, and that kind of painting. And those paintings do take a very long time, um, but at the same time, I've been, like, say, the past 15 years, I've been trying to kind of merge these two styles together. Um, Something like a good example is Rubens. When you look at Rubens' paintings, you'll notice he's very expressive with his underpaintings, but then he does these colored glazes over them, and they're just really nice. They have a lot of depth. So I've been kind of working with that. So working this way is really satisfying. To me, I kind of see it as a way to loosen up. It's so easy to work on things and get so caught up into the details, and everything has to be felt like it's perfect, or just a certain way. And with direct painting, I feel a lot of times where it's really it's okay, to let things just go a little bit. It doesn't have to be perfect. And so it gives you that freedom, at least me, the freedom to kind of let things go a little bit and move more quickly. Okay, so I just want to knock back this white a little bit here, and then move on. One of the things with straight painting as you're working, at least for me, what I found over the years is that kind of going with what I was saying before, try not to dwell. Because what I found is that as the oil paint builds up, it gets, slippery, especially if you're working on a board. And that slipperiness, it doesn't really help you when it comes to if you're trying to do detail work. So if you're dwelling on an area and you're trying to do all this detail work, and you keep on focusing on it and adding more paint and adding more paint, it becomes really unmanageable. And if you just let it go and move on to another part of the painting, and you come back later, like an hour later, or a pass, or however long, but give it a little time to sit there and set. And I think what you're going to find is that the paint, especially if you're working with like a medium like liquid, the paint starts firming up just a little bit on you, and then you can go back into it. But it is kind of reliant on the medium, and so a lot of people do direct painting where they're not using medium, they're just using tube paint. In that case, it's a little bit more. It won't set on you, as quickly. So you're going to want to think a little bit thinner applications at first, and be more precise, and develop that as you go. But with the liquid, and it doesn't have to be, there's, I think Gamblin makes Miglip or whatever, so there's different kind of like Alkyd solutions out there that you can use. But it really does help dry the paint. Overnight, definitely. You can come back in the next morning, it's all dry. But even as you're working, I do notice it stiffening up, tacking up within an hour. So when I was talking earlier about like plein air painters, or recommending that maybe just put a coat of liquid down first before you paint, it does kind of help the whole painting that way. It it tacks everything up after an hour as you work, and things become easier to apply. But that's just for a couple passes, because then after that, then you're looking at it gets slippery again. And so long story short, applying the local color, you really, again, just want to keep it thin the first pass if you can. And when I was doing the books up here in the back, it got a little, I put more passes on there in the immediate short run to try to get that down as far as, the basic details back there. But I did notice it was, adding a little bit too much. This thin layer that you do here, it'll be easier to put any type of detail work onto this as you work the painting. And if you go too thick, then it's just a bit too much. And right now I'm using a synthetic hog hair type brush of all, Michael's. It's actually an Artist Loft brand. I don't really. Here, hold on a second. Let me push this flat. Oh, great. Let me bring this up. Recenter that. So let me take a second here. And because these boards are so thin, what they do is they fall between the shelf and the wood here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to place a little piece of tape here. And this should help keep the board from slipping like that. There we go. And that way I can push the board right up against and work that way. Is it center? Yeah, there we go. Sorry about that. There we go, much better. That's bouncy. Yeah, canvases typically you can have like a top come down and support it a little bit better, but when I found working with these boards, they're a little bit harder to secure. They're just so thin. As far as the type of board I'm using, this one's an ampersand. It's one of the more dark brown boards. It more resembles masonite. For those of you that may be older, masonite was a material that you could find quite readily in a lot of hardware stores, and it was wonderful to paint on. As long as you had a table saw, you can cut it up into little pieces and gesso it, and I used that as a student for quite a while. And but from what I understand, they started like not carrying it partly for health reasons. And I could be wrong on this, but from what I understand, it had something with formaldehyde or something like that was in part of the process. So now, really, the only time you see those boards, they're different. Because I do see like Hobby Lobby has something similar. Not Hobby Lobby. What is it? Home Depot. They have something similar in stock, but it's not the same. It's not the same old masonite. And so the ampersand, they do have something very similar, if not the same, and maybe they get away with it because they're pre-cutting it and producing it that way. But I found those boards to be pretty nice. You just gesso them. I don't personally buy the pre-gessoed when it comes to the boards. A lot of it has to do with the industrialization of the boards with the gessoing. I found it's not consistent. It's, or panels or canvases, any of that. When you start working with lots of them and, buying them, and, one will be great, and then you pull another out of the pack, and you can kind of see through the gesso. They're lacking consistency. And that's for every manufacturer. I'm not just targeting ampersand on that. Because I used to work on Frederick's pre-gessoed canvas for a long time. You can buy it by the roll, and then I would stretch it. It stretches wonderful. It's got no sag. A lot of canvas sags after you stretch it because you gesso it. You stretch it, then you gesso it, and then it starts sagging on you a little bit. The Frederick's never, it's pre-gessoed, and it was nice because you can then stretch it, and it wouldn't have that sag. It'd be nice and tight the whole painting through, and so I worked with that for a long time, and then one year I bought a roll, and the gesso you could see through it, and it was spotty, and it was like, well. So ever since then, I stopped doing that. And so I kind of lost trust in the gessoing. So I gesso my own. Now the ampersand boards are a little bit pricey. A lot of the pre-made, even the canvases, a lot of people buy and use those, but a lot of this stuff is really pricey. Paying $10 for a blank canvas. To paint on. And the boards are a little cheaper than that, but it's still a similar type of issue. So if you don't have the means, hopefully you have the ability to maybe save for a table saw, and you can just buy sheets of Luan. It's like that nice plywood that has the nice surface, and they do sell it like Lowe's, and there's basic Luan, which, God, I think basic is maple, or maybe it's just pine, but they do sell maple, walnut, oak, so they have variations with different, birch is actually, I think, one of my favorites. And then you could just take that, you can get a whole sheet for like $30, 8x4 sheet, I think is, I think that's 40, but it's like a 1/4 inch, thick, or an 1/8 inch thick, is probably better. You cut it up to as many pieces as you want, and you can do it much cheaper. So there's ways to do all this, and the canvases, you can always just gesso your canvas, or stretch your own canvas, buy the canvas raw, build your own stretcher bars, that kind of stuff. Okay, so I blocked in the table, or not the table. These are on a box. I have one of those old-fashioned wooden boxes in my studio here that I use to prop some of these still lifes up here. So I have everything kind of background-wise blocked in. So now I'm going to just kind of focus on the onions. I'm not going to use very much different colors, though, because this is red onion. It's very similar to the shadow in the box. The onion's much more rich, of course. But really my main goal here is to go for tonal value and color. And so I'm not too worried about the dynamics. of, the intensities of the color here and there, all that kind of stuff. So that's really just the blocking in I'm concerned about. But, this is a good, pretty close color. I might go a little bit more pure here, make it a little stronger. There we go. So the onion is much richer. And again, this is a little bit more blue-purple than the onion really is, but it's okay. Just going for the shadow. I'll come back to that. That is one of the freeing things about working this way. You can literally, just kind of casually, or I should say casually, add things to start with, and then tighten as you go. Or you can be real tight in the beginning. It all depends on your personality, of course. What you enjoy about the painting process itself. But for me, I do like realizing it quickly, getting it in place, and then I'll slow down and I'll focus. With alla prima painting, or I'll even refer to it as plein air. It is recommended that once you kind of get everything blocked in, or maybe idealized would be a good word, because some people they'll just spend a lot of time on a drawing, literally with like a pencil or something, and they want to see like all the detail and understand the form and the volume and everything, and then they'll start painting. And when you work certain ways, and this is kind of where you have to explore it for yourself, but starting a painting, you can get everything in place compositionally, but then come in and really look at the color for each mark you do. And I've had the honor of like working, I wouldn't say with, but alongside a person that worked that way, and I was able to watch them work. He was a landscape painter, and it was a artist residency that we were at, and he was there for 3 months. I was there for a year, but I was able to like kind of go out to where he was, that daily, or I didn't go daily, but I was able to see the paintings progress, but also watch him work. And he literally would sit there and study with the scenery in front of him. He wasn't painting like I'm painting, or like you might see a lot of plein air painters paint, or people that do these quicker paintings. He was really looking at the color, and then mixing, taking the time to mix the color for each mark. So once he got everything idealized as far as the composition and the detail, if I remember, he did do like a turpentine type wash to begin with. But he was kind of detailed with that, and then his thing was being exact with each mark. So it wasn't really about blocking in color necessarily. It was being really accurate and creating the detail from the beginning. But and that's really kind of recommended if you want to go into studying art as a practice, because that's good discipline, right? So when you're sitting there and you're looking at color in that way and you're mixing it, that's a good way of going about it, because then you have to sit there and practice that every brush mark you do. How do you mix that color? Look, mix it, apply it, and then you go to the next part of it. You look, you mix it, apply it. Whereas here, I'm kind of the way I'm working it kind of sidesteps it a little bit. I'm kind of blocking in the tonal value, but then I'm also doing the local color. But I'm generalizing it. I'm taking one color and adding it to quite a bit of the stuff. And then as I do layer by layer, I'll refine it. And that's really the difference. Now, the way he was working, though, too, took weeks, or at least a week. He would come back to the same setting every day and work. And he worked all day on spot, on location, and so those are other things you got to think about, as far as how you paint, because it's important. Like I really do like layering, but the layering, it takes sometimes months to do a painting, and I don't necessarily rely on the income from those to survive, and that's why I can do it. Whereas if you're painting to survive or make a living, then you have to start thinking about how do you do things quicker, more efficiently. And that's where a lot of the direct painting kind of comes in for a lot of people. It's a quicker way. You can do an entire painting in a sitting, and and then do another one the next day. So there's a lot more opportunities that develop along the way for sales and all this other stuff. However, I will say, or I should say, I feel a lot of the sale prices for the more quick art or the direct painting art is less. So they'll sell for less. But it's not always the case. You will find these artists that people will pay a lot of money, for, and it would be for things that only took them an hour or two to do. So don't necessarily think that that's a rule. It's just a tendency when you look at the big picture of everybody. What is it? 1 in a million, they say. One artist out of every million will have luck like that, or excuse me. Well, luck. A lot of it's marketing, communications, how you network. There's really not much luck into it, really, to be honest. Painting, if you want to go into the arts, a lot of art is entrepreneurial. So keep that in mind too. There's fairs, there's galleries, there's all sorts of things like that. But you can do it yourself. You can, the age we live in, and a lot of people don't really care to sell their work. They just like painting. They just like doing the art. So that's all right too. Okay. All right. So I more or less have everything in place. So it's very basic in how it's been blocked in. So I'm just doing the local colors as I've been referring to them. And now I'm going to kind of explore everything. And I'm going to start with the back. I want to dull down the background here. The bookcase in the back to start with. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on the background though, because it is the background. But I just want to kind of knock it back a little bit, solidify it. It's kind of streaky and stuff like that. And so I mixed a little red here. I'm making it more opaque. The original dark I put down was a little too transparent and streaky. You will find a lot more streakiness with transparent colors. Unless you're doing layering, layering will kind of take that streakiness away. Just because you're putting layer on top of layer on top of layer, let it dry, come back in next day, next week, put another layer on. And that does help, of course. But when you're working directly like this, I have found you really do need to make use of opacities in order for things to work. Go back later, towards the end of the painting, and insert the pure darks on top of an opaque. That'll help quite a bit as far as pushing things back. But it won't have that see-through effect of just being pure. And that's kind of also what I'm doing here. The background has set just slightly, so it is a little bit easier to paint on right now. Everything is covered for the most part, except for like a little bit in here. That is allowing me to apply the paint much better. Again, you want to be careful of or watch the amount of paint you're using. If you're seeing large like shadows or something from the marks you're making in the beginning, that's not good. So maybe wipe off your brush with a paper towel or something, lessen the load. Okay. An example of the detail would be like, these books do have writing on the side of them. If this was more of like a really detailed painting, I would take the time and I would sit there and I'd write everything out. But it's meant to be in the back, sitting in the back, and because of that, I don't think I am going to put the text into that. I just don't want it to visually come forward. Excuse me. Oh, too late. Try that again. Still on the light side, but it's kind of sitting in place well. And as I was talking about the artist that I was able to watch work there, and you can always go back into these paintings and make them more detailed. A common habit of a lot of people, especially landscape, is to be on location and get the first few passes, and take 2 to 3 hours, and block everything in, but they're not really finished, and so it's, but you have the composition, you're seeing it in person. That's different than working off of a photograph. It's a big difference, being able to see everything in person like that. Whereas the cameras, they distort things so easily, unless you're really good with, photography and lenses and stuff. But so if you sit there and paint everything in person, then after you do that, take a picture, right? Take a picture. The picture will look totally different than what you have, almost guaranteed, especially if you take it with your cell phone. But take that picture and then go home, print the picture out, and then trying to resist the urge to change the shape and placement of everything, and just use that photograph as reference, for the rest of your filling in of everything, and finalize the landscape from the picture, and rely off your memory for the in between the details and all that kind of stuff. Excuse me. But that's what a lot of people do, and it's a good way to start now, and then you later on you'll take your time to make it more solid and complete. Okay, so this is more of a gray. This is actually a white wall, but in the shadows, there's a lot of color there. So it's here it's like this bluish purple, but it's like a bluish purple kind of gray. So it's a little mix. I have a softer brush tip, so I quit using that hog hair bristle, and so that allows for better blending and everything like that. You do want to consider the way in which you make your mark. Think of the cross contour when you apply things. For background spaces such as walls, or even if it was just like a flat space, try to just use the X and the Y axis when you're applying everything. Try not to paint like rain. Try to just keep it to one direction and the other, almost like a fabric or something. And that that's a nice neutral sculptural effect. So painting is a lot like sculpture, in the sense that, unlike drawing where you're doing outlines of everything, with painting you're really thinking of the volume and the form, the texture. How is that structure? What's the volume like? How's it? And when you do that and make your marks texturally, how do you apply that so it represents that texture, that surface? But then you're also doing it in a manner that sticks to the 3 dimensions. So it's very sculptural in that way. So I'm literally just mixing into the paint on the board as I do this. I'm going to reserve as I go on with the painting, I'll be doing more mark making, where I mix a color and then make a mark and leave it. But in the beginning here, I'm still kind of thinking about the structure and the color, tone. I'm not too worried about the texture and the color temperatures and highlights and shadows just yet, as far as textures and details. But I am thinking about the direction of my mark as I make it. There we go. And so with that might be the background now, and I might just leave it like that. I'll probably go in and tone some of these things down a little bit more, maybe. But I might just leave it like that. It's nice and neutral. It's pretty good. So I think at this stage, I was a little messy in the beginning here with my mixing. So I'm going to take some time here. I'm going to clean my palette. So I paint on glass, or I work with a glass palette, I should say. And one of the reasons I like glass is you can clean it pretty easily. I use one of these house scrapers. It's got like a big flat razor blade on it. But you can see like how bound up it is. You know, I've been using the same one for a few years now. They only cost like $5, so and you can get replacement blades for them. But what I found is it gets hard to replace the blades unless you're cleaning the thing, you know, really carefully all the time. And I just don't have the patience to sit there and scrub these things, when I'm done. So, so they usually last though quite a while, and then I'll just get a new one. You know, they're not expensive. You can get them at Lowe's, Home Depot. I think Walmart has them too. So, but they're pretty available. Now the glass, on the other hand, is not too available. This is I'm always on the lookout for department stores throwing away glass shelves that are tempered glass, thick glass. This is actually an old dining room table that the corner got cracked on. So it's a nice big table, even though you wouldn't know, but it's all glass and it's about 3/4 of an inch thick. So it's really kind of like a perfect studio table. And then I put a piece of paper underneath, a white piece of paper, so that you can see the color with the oil paint. The oil paint it has transparency to it, so that when you're working, you want to be sure that, because you see how dark it is out of the tube. But it's when the color gets stretched out, or even this green, you can see the green, you'll see the brightness of it. And so that's more really for glazes, so when you're doing glazes, a lot of people that do direct painting, mostly, they'll have a gray piece of paper underneath, and that's so they can see the purity of the color, because they're working more opaquely. And so they mix the color. They know what that color is going to look like when they put it onto the canvas, in other words. Whereas when you're just seeing the color saturation of the color and mixing it, the white doesn't help you too much as far as, because you'll mix it here and it looks great, and then you'll put it up there and it looks totally different. But I would rather be able to see the color. And with the gray, you can't really see it very good when it comes to the transparency. So, but yeah, be on the lookout. I do have other glass palettes that I've acquired. So if anything ever happens to this table, I'll be using those. And I got those from a Michael's around here. They were, I don't know if they were getting rid of all. They were redesigning their store, and they were literally throwing away every shelf that they had throughout the whole store. It wasn't Michael's, it was Hobby Lobby. And I'm like, what are you doing with all that? They had them all piled up at the front door, ready to toss. And I'm like, and they're like, well, we are selling them for $2 a piece if you want one. I was like, yeah, I'll take half of them. So they took half their stock. But that was for, a lot of it was for my classroom. So I teach. Okay, sorry about that. I had a, so throughout the painting, I'll always take time to clean the palette, and then just refresh the space so that I can work again. I'm going to replenish my white though. I went through quite a bit of white. Now I use, for the most part with my colors, three brands. Winsor & Newton's probably the main brand. They have pretty good color. It's mainly because of cost. They're pretty affordable, but they do have good color too. But then if I need like a nice intense color, I'll go for Old Holland. So like they're the go-to for purples, and for me, I think they have really good purple selection and blues. Um, and then they also have better, like when you get into glazing, you need really good quality paints for saturations and transparencies, and Old Holland's pretty good with that, and then so is Rembrandt. Rembrandt paints are pretty good. Okay, so I'm going to go to actually a smaller brush here and work on the table, I keep calling it the table, work on the box here. So I already have a pretty bright lay-in highlight of that. So I think what I'm going to do though is kind of go for this orange yellow with just a touch of Viridian. I'll give it a little bit of ultramarine. The Viridian made it a little too green. There you go. So just to gray it a little bit. And this is to help kind of push things a little bit in depth. Well, speaking of color mixes, that is almost the exact same color. So let me go darker with it. There we go. And the other thing I kind of want to do here is I want to push back the background of this box here. I don't want it jumping forward. I want to start being able to control the depth of space with the color saturation. So everything in the back here, I'm going to kind of apply this more gray earth tone. It's almost like a flesh color, but the reason I'm doing that is to recede it visually. I do see that in the box as well. The box has like some staining to it that is kind of making it gray. But it's kind of minor. And I do find that a lot with painting is, because I do, work representationally. I do look at what it is I'm painting all the time. So, but what I find is it's almost suggestive. It's like, because you are in essence painting what you see, but you do have to make decisions about how bright to make the color, how to do the color, how to push things back, bring things forward. Are you going to super saturate the color? There's all these questions that you have to work with, and a lot of times the visual information in front of you, whether you're working off of a photograph or from life, you will see little hints or suggestions of things that will lend themselves to the idea. Color in itself is like that quite a bit. Let me readjust that line. And a lot of things, color is just, it's, you just get a hint of it. You could tell it's a little orange or a little red. And then you take that hint and then you expand upon it. Make it redder, right? Make it darker, make it lighter. So it's a lot of, well, I found anyhow, a lot of exaggeration with the materials. The other thing, which I really struggled with, and I guess I still do, is color. And with color, it's this idea of not being afraid of going too bold with it. And I do pull back a little bit, but I think there's phases of growth. Like when I was in school, I used to use white on everything. I was really tinting everything, and neutralizing it. I was thinking of it more as like tone, and then it took me a while to get out of that. It was like this. Oh, it was almost like an addiction. I really had a hard time not using white. But, you know, I finally managed to break free of that. And then I found color is the next thing that it's become kind of like this aiming point, you know. So and for me, what I found is start by putting down the hints of it. You know, like here I'm seeing the shadow, and it does have blue in it. You know, it's a gray, but there's a little blue in it. So I'm using a little bit of blue, you know, with this color, and I'm adding that to that. But as each layer goes by, I can start adding more color. You know, I can make it bluer. You know, make it more vibrant. You know, so each pass, you know, don't be afraid to embellish. And if you're fortunate, you can do it right away. You know, and so you see artists like who was that? Richard Smith. Is it Richard Smith? He's that oil painter that's really expressive. He also does watercolors, but he just lays the color in. You know, he's not building up necessarily. He mixes it and applies it all in one, and it's just deep and rich, and you know, he nails it right away. And that's, you know, I find that kind of hard to do right away, but every year I do seem to get a little better as far as clarity, you know, how I approach things. So, and you know, and I think everyone does. So don't be afraid of taking your time and practicing. Don't get upset if things don't work out. Eventually, hopefully they will. But the important thing is that you enjoy yourself, right? This box has a little chip in it, so I'm going to try to bring that in. And if you ever find yourself putting too much paint on, because with oil paint, what will happen is it'll be so much paint that you can't change the color. I mean, you can, but barely. You know, don't be afraid to wipe out, or, you know, remove it, take a Q-tip, clean it, or a rag, you know, wipe it off and just kind of reapply everything. It's okay to do that. And, you know, and there's another thing too, which I'm not going to be demonstrating here, but there's a lot of artists that they'll actually scrape away as part of the art. So while they're working, they'll be adding, taking away. And you know, a lot of times they'll do it at the end, and so they'll put all this time, and you know, they'll be adding, and then at the end they just start reducing, and the ones that plan it well enough, they'll even like have their imprimatura to be like maybe a bright orange or something like that, and so when they reduce it like that bright color that was there, the bottom of everything shows right through and supports the image. You know, and some people go to the you know, nth degree and they actually map out everything, and they'll do kind of like a negative color underpainting. So everything will be complementary. They'll do complementary first, and so that when they paint it, the underpainting shows through a little bit to help visually set the colors into space as you work, so it looks more natural. You know, because that's another thing that we struggle with paint and mixing and color. It's very easy to make everything very cartoony as you work, and you know, and the color's just too pure or whatever. So you have to kind of go in with other colors to visually, you know, push it back or set it in space so that it's not so cartoony. And you know, and there's different methods, you know, with glazing. It's that using layer on top of layer, you know, so you can have color on one layer and a different color on the other layer. Direct painting, we have optical mixing. So you literally are putting reds and to green trees, to make the shadows, for example. So there's a lot of strategy in painting. It's one of the things I like about painting. And it's really up to you. But if you're beginning or just starting out, it's hard to know about anything. And many times we're just trying to figure out how to control it in the beginning. How do we get what we want to a certain degree, at least. And I remember going through that myself. It was like a constant disaster. I couldn't get the colors to work. I couldn't, why was this happening? Why was that happening? But, over time, now I'm going in with an orange kind of color, so that green I put into the background. I'm kind of like complementing it a little bit with some orange. And I'm trying to represent the texture as I go. I'm not being afraid of going into like the onions here and all that, because I'll be painting them next. So that's that idea of working the back first. It allows you to, it's that overlapping idea. So you can come in and start overlapping your marks. But, look at what it is you're doing. Look at the image, look at the still life or what's in front of you. Look for the suggestions of color. If you see that hint of red, put some red in there. Don't hold back if you can. Be bold. See what happens. Some people prefer to have things subtle, but they'll still be putting color in there. It's just not as intense. And then you'll have the artists that literally like paint with color out of the tube. They don't mix it. They just put pure color down, visually make everything. And those tend to be really neonic, but enjoyable at the same time. You can see evidence in that too. Like you look at people like, Van Gogh was good. He did. You look at his portraits. He's got like pure red and green in there on the flesh. He's not intermixing them. He's not blending them. He's letting the colors do the blending visually. Monet, no, he did it differently. He did it through more layering, like pastel. Degas, Degas' pastels were really nice. His paintings were very muted, though. So the idea of struggle, with color. He's got all those grays and his oil painting work, and then his pastels are like a totally different thing. The racetracks are pretty colorful, though, the horse racing scenes and everything, with the painting. So look for evidence, study other artwork. Museums are always good. Books. I recommend collection books or catalogs, exhibition catalogs. Those are full of interesting facts that you don't really find anywhere else. Okay, so I'm still pushing this box here a little bit more. I'm mixing to a more electronic, intense, let's say, light color. I'm using a lot of white here, but I'm trying to keep it saturated, so it's light, much more lighter, but pure in color. And I'm going to slow down here a little bit, and I'm going to try to start putting in details into this box, if I can. The box is pretty wet. I might have to let it sit for a little bit. Just wanting to mix with everything. But another thing that we could, or I can discuss here is when you're working with paint this way, when you look at different artists, throughout time and history, and you see their paintings, especially the ones that did more heavy application, and were not, well, I don't know, it's hard to say. It's like they were more responsive in how they worked, meaning like they responded emotionally more. And you could almost feel like what the artist was feeling and how they painted it that day. Some are kind of overly loose, if you will. Others are really tight. Same artist. And you'll see like the variance of detail and style from day to day. So you almost can feel that migraine that the day they did that, they must have been preoccupied with something or in a hurry. It's just the way it's being done from day to day, which I find that really interesting. And then other artists that you can't tell. It's like they control it so much that it's you can see consistency in how they embellish things and stuff, but they do it in a manner that says a story, if you will. They can control the emotion. When they apply the mark, they're doing it intently, and it serves the image, whatever they're trying to display or convey. So keep that in mind. So like when you're doing your work, maybe it's okay just to one day be really messy and apply it very strongly, and I'll be almost overly aggressive, and then maybe another day it's all muted and it's all slow and smooth and almost shallow in its color. And then think about also how that that look feels. I think that's another important part of expression and how we work with art. So you need to be able to, in some cases, control that. Okay. So I might lay off the table, or I keep calling it a table, the box here for a little bit. Before I do that, I want to go back to the green here. So I'm going to take some of this green, and I'm actually going to work green and yellow and red, and create a shadow for the box, the liquid. And so that'll be up front here. The box's shadow is kind of in a green-purple. It's weird because the box is tan, but the shadows kind of have a green light with a purple contrast. And again, too, I'm not being overly aggressive with the color. I kind of like to think of it as I'm laying little clues to the color as I go. I get a hint of the color. I distribute the color, but not overly, just a little bit. But and then when I come back around again, I'll try to go more into the detail with that. And bring it to life a little bit more. And I guess I prefer working that way. And so um, build it a little bit more slowly, rather than trying to make everything perfect the first time around. Try to also look for little variations, the surface in which you're looking at. It's very easy to go into like auto patterning. Yeah, I'm kind of guilty of that already at the top here. It's very similarly laid. There's just all these little nuances when you look at surfaces. It's like, even if it is a wood grain, and there's that one section there where there's like a little scratch, or maybe it got stained somehow, back in 1980, something happened and there's a fire on the table or something, there's always been this dark blue little mark there, that, we try to clean it as best we can, but it's still there, that kind of stuff, Otherwise, everything looks kind of fake, right? It's you're either patterning it so it looks artificial. You don't intend to, but what when you apply a pattern, a lot of times it's like we've created a recipe, and you just start adding it, and you go into autopilot a lot of times too. You're not paying attention anymore. You're just doing it. Take some time though and really look, to see what's happening, because you'll find that there are certain textures here or there. I actually, I found things like sports clothing or gear, like a hockey puck. Have you ever seen a hockey puck that's been around for a year or two? It's not smooth, it's got some scuffing, and baseballs are the same way. Mitts, baseball mitts, bats. They're not like brand new. There's all these little dings and character to it. So so try to be true to that as best you can. But again, too, a lot of it's time based too. You don't have 10 hours to spend. But then, again, too, you don't have to finish it one day. You can always come back. Okay. So let that be. Now I'm going to go on to these onions here. And this is where I think what I'm going to do is start dark to light. Now, dark to light is kind of recommended. It's actually kind of like one of these rules in painting that, I don't know, it is and it isn't true, It helps. But I'm going to start with the white onions here, and I'm going to go for that shadow. Oop. Give it some liquid. But I'm going to try to be a little bit more careful to the details now. And I'm going to try to avoid like overly blending. I want to start seeing the marks, seeing the form, the textures, applying them that way. And always makes little notes for yourself in your head or whatever as far as what's happening. Resist the urge to just kind of make something up. Well, that's why I recommend it. But I do know there's a lot of great artists out there that really just kind of work off of memory, and and then they can work like this at the same time. It's like they're automatically envisioning how this looks in their head. But always be a little, or try to be a little conscious of how much paint you're putting down. Try to be a little bit reserved. You've got all at least the way I'm working here, you have all the tone down. Now it's a matter of finding the more detail and boosting the color. Don't feel like you have to blend everything. I think a lot of people are kind of addicted to blending. I don't feel like I was ever one of those people. But you can see it in their drawings a lot. They just blend. Every time they put a mark, they have to blend it. Trying to vary it a little bit. Give it, it's one of the compositional, variety. You think of variety. Another thing with painting too, and I mentioned it earlier in this painting, is this idea of working the painting in form. So when you're doing that, you want to resist that urge to do like a line, for example, over, or almost like like you would when you're drawing. You want to avoid that if you can. You're thinking of it structurally. You're thinking of it in volume. So your marks are really there to demonstrate that. Think of the cross contour as you're working. There is a visual phenomenon that I find really amazing, because it's almost everywhere. But it's recommended that when you paint, that wherever you have a highlight, try to have a shadow behind it. And a lot of times when you think about that, you kind of, I don't know, for me anyhow, I kind of assumed it was kind of like more of a guidance, something that you put in as the artist. But over the years, it's really uncanny. It's like, because, I set up like still lives for the classroom all the time and stuff like that, and I'll be looking at it, and there's always this natural thing that happens where, when you have these highlights, the background's darker. Where there's a shadow, and the reflective light, it's almost always true, so it's like if you have a portrait where you have somebody sitting in a highlight, with a light on them, one side of their face will be light, the background will be dark, but then on the other side, the background will be light, compared to the darkness of the face. And it just goes to show that, like, a lot of times when we do art, we kind of do the opposite for whatever reason. Naturally, an awful lot of people, they'll make the background, even or flat. They'll spend hours on the portrait, and then the background they'll just go in and put a single tone throughout the whole background. And that's when I started identifying now. Seeing people do that, and it just tells me that they're not looking really at the environmental space, and everything else that's happening. So, I find that kind of interesting. But it's a good, it's really good to start trying to include, I think, within your work, that demonstrating that. But really, when you start looking for it, it's there. So it's not like you'd be doing that, as some kind of like illustrative rule or something like that. It's in life. You see it all over the place. It is. It's very rare not to. There has been occasions where I see it where, for whatever reason, the way the area is lit or something, it's just weird, and it doesn't work like that. So it doesn't happen all the time, but it's pretty common. But tonal ambiguity is what they call that. So look for the tonal ambiguity. Rembrandt did it a lot. A lot of the masters, you'll see it in their work. So I'm working more with a little bit more purple now. So I had the red, and now I'm going for like the blue, bluish purple, kind of the shading. Still focusing primarily on texture. Onions are great for that. I mean, they're really full of cross contour, by their nature. So it's a lot of fruit is really good for exploring paint. One, because of its color, but depending on how it's structured too. A lot of fruits very, like pineapples, for example. They have this wonderful structure to them. Okay, so now I'm going to go for highlights. Grab another brush here. And I'm going to do two different kinds of highlights here. We have the thinning of the onion skin that has a very warm highlight. And then there's the shine, which is, you could just use white exposed, but it's almost more blue or pink. Too light. There we go. Gotta darken it a little bit. This is still kind of in shadow, but it's more of a thinning of the skin, of the onion skin here, kind of seeing through to the onion itself. And feel free to add some suggestions, maybe. I do intend on trying to do a painting every week if possible. I think I finally got everything set up. Um, I worked on it. I started working on it last year actually, but then I ran out of time. School got busy, but I think I have a space set up now where I can do this more consistently. I think I worked out most of the problems I was running into with the software and everything else. So I do think I'm making progress with all that. But then the idea is like, what is it that I'll be painting week in and week out kind of thing. But I am limited, just so everyone knows a little bit. I do work off both Life, like tonight I'm working off of Life. It's in front of me here. But I also have a lot of photo shoots that I do where I'll go to like Walmart and I'll just like take lots of pictures. Not at Walmart, but I'll buy the fruit and vegetables and stuff like that, and then I'll make a day out of it and just do all these still lives and everything. And I do that a couple times a year. But it's a lot of you come up with a lot of compositions when you do that. So maybe I'll be working on photographs here and there as well. But if there's something that somebody's interested in wanting to know, I can also bring it into my conversations here. I do plan on discussing casually, like I have been today, while I paint. I'm going to try to talk about my decisions and thought processes when I paint, but also addressing some issues. So if anyone has any issues that they're dealing with that they can't figure out, or they want me to just to kind of talk about, put it in the comments or email me. That's another. You can always email me, and then I'll try to bring it up some on the next project. But yeah, so every 7 to 10 days. The one thing I'm finding difficult about all this is the editing, because I do believe in doing like this a longer capture, if you will. So painting, recording it for like 3 hours, for example. I think that is kind of important, even though it goes against kind of like the theory or what a lot of YouTubers are trying to do. My thoughts is you can always fast forward that, if you don't want to watch the whole thing. It's just for me, I remember when I was, learning and starting painting, I really enjoyed just watching somebody work. Not showboating, not just somebody working, seeing how they're doing it. But what it means, though, it takes a long time to edit, because I also like to go back and forth between my shots and try to like show you guys the palette as I'm mixing it and stuff like that. So I just didn't realize how long things took to do on the computer. So that's so like the painting only takes like 3 hours, but then going over editing it and all that kind of stuff, it can take quite a long time. But that would be like, so I guess no more than once a week, really. Now the color I just mixed here is actually a light blue, pink, like light purple. I used blue and pink on it, but this is the highlight from the light on the onions. So I have a light that's shining down on them, and that's reflecting more of a cool highlight. So as you think about like the color temperature of things, what colors would you visualize as being warm to cool? And then experimenting with that, So, maybe it's obnoxiously, blues, very, very blue, or maybe it's more realistic, so, but, don't be afraid to push the envelope, see what happens. Another good thing I found from working in like these stages where you do just one pass at a time, it does help you, I think, getting more complicated or complex details. There's something about reinvestigating a shape after you've investigated it already, where it kind of allows you to reinterpret it, like subtle things that you may have not seen the first time, or you couldn't dynamically apply it at once. And then when you come around the second time, it allows you to kind of, perhaps re-envision, paint over or add certain things from that time. And then it kind of creates a sandwiching effect, so, and as you keep on, re-envisioning, re-investigating it, each pass, it gets a little bit more complicated, clearer as far as, the natural textures and those elements coming through. But if you try to do it in one sitting, or at once, it doesn't. It's harder to do it that way. And I might leave this alone. Go to a purple orange. There we go. And then I'll come back in after all that at a later stage. But I'm not really going too far with these videos, to be honest. I'm going to work on it for a couple hours, but it's one of the things, if you have the time, you can really spend a lot of time working these scenes and developing the painting, which, if you do, I encourage it. But there's also this thing about being able to, do it somewhat quickly. How fast can you do it? What's the simplest way you can do it? In a way, that's the element a lot of people are kind of, thinking of as the art of it. How can you simplify this expressively and yet have it come across? And like each layer or pass I do, I'm thinking more color, more intense, more saturated. And that is a way I think of it too. Is like, what's the limit? How far can I make that? How red can you make it before it stops looking natural? And it's required off of what's around it. So like you can do a bright red, and if you have a lot of green or greenish elements around it, it's going to be very bright red. But there are other colors you can work with the bright red that, even though you are using bright red, it doesn't quite appear or feel as bright as it really is, based off of those colors. And that's the juggle. That's when you start juggling all that. Okay. Move out to the red, purple, red Indian. Again, I think I'm going to start with the dark. I treat it more as blue, more ultramarine blue, a little bit of red. Oh, too much. There we go. So the red Indians, they almost have like a, I don't know. It's like they have a leaching, staining effect. Their color, it creates an additional kind of element of texturing to it. Oop. A little too heavy. Every once in a while you won't realize it, but you'll have like this huge clump of paint on your brush, and then you'll go apply it. One of the things to keep in mind is the paint that's pure, that's transparent out of the tube is really nice for shadow work, especially because when you lay it down, and depending on the concentration of it or what's under it when you apply it, it tends to look black. But then if you like spread it out a little bit so it's a little thin, that color really beams up, and the saturation of it really kind of shines, if you will. And it can, quite literally shine like that too. So, and I find it, with really more of the transparent colors. So, that's something that you might want to practice with, as far as, how do you manage that and control the pure color as you apply it, versus the more mixed colors. I do tend to use smaller brushes as I advance. And this is true for my, even when I do bigger works. When I start a painting, the brush size is kind of dictated by the size of the artwork, so 8 by 10, 20 by 20, 24 by 36, so on and so forth. You know, the bigger it is, the bigger brush when you start. But then once everything's kind of blocked in, at least for me, then it's like, you know, then the detail kind of begins. And then the question is, what level of detail do you want to go? So, like for a mural, for example, you don't really need all that detail, unless it's something that somebody's going to be able to walk up to real close and look at. But if it's like a mural that's on the side of a building, you know, 20 feet above, you know, people can't get up there. You know, you can't. So you can think of it, you know, more broadly, and, you know, sacrifice a lot of the detail elements, but still make it look detailed nonetheless. You know, and bigger paintings tend to kind of invite that as well. You know, they're still detailed, but they won't be as detailed as you might get with a close-up still life or something like that. And you'll see that with a lot of, like, if you go to the museums and you start, you know, especially the big national museums, they have those big, like, 40-foot canvases and stuff, or, you know, 20-foot. And you'll notice, you know, the artists tend to be a little bit more broad, you know, based on the size. I think I'm going to fill this in here just to give it some background. I never filled that in the first time around. That's partly because this onion has a lot of roots right there. Alizarin crimson's a really nice color for darks, you know, just to use pure. It does, you know, again, it's one of those that I was kind of referring to. It has that really nice dark presence to it, but it has also this, like, real richness that makes it a strong dark. You know, it really goes into depth. You know, and as far as for those that are learning to paint, I do remember when I was, you know, starting out, I always felt slightly oppressed, you know. I wanted to kind of go dive immediately into, like, complicated work, and when I tried to do that, it was always kind of hard to do because I was struggling with all the balancing of the colors and keeping it, and, you know, tied together as an image, and you know, so there was all these things that were kind of defeating in a lot of ways. And I don't, you know, I never really kind of, well, I did, you know, eventually I was, you know, probably in my late 30s, 40s. But I really stuck to that. For a long time, I tried always doing the more complicated things. And when I look back at it, I didn't learn fast because of that. Because the bigger pieces, they have so much more problem solving in them. And I always thought of it as in terms of, well, I am learning a lot because there's a lot of problems, that I'm resolving in each one of these. But the truth of the matter is, it made it more difficult, you know. And then, like, if you were to just say do a quick painting like this every day, I think you'd learn a lot faster. So if you look, go over it, I would say your painting would get better, in other words, within a shorter period of time. Because you're trying this and this one, you're trying that and another, you're not spending like months on one painting. And then you can even just keep track of yourself. Look to see how much you're, take pictures of your work and then look back over the year and see how much you improve. Because it doesn't feel like you improve. And then one day you'll be looking at a picture you did, 2 years prior or something like that, and you'll feel kind of silly, that you thought that was great at one time. That happens to me when I look at my high school work and stuff, get kind of embarrassed. I feel a little stupid, it's like, oh my God. But at the time, it was the greatest thing. But that you'll see that, though, I guess, more quickly if you just practice and do more quick kind of practices. And so here I'm kind of going with just a pure cadmium red. So I started with the purple. I've been working with crimson, alizarin crimson. Now this is cadmium red. I'm kind of building in the highlights here with cadmiums are nice because they're very strong. They're very opaque. They're very strong colors, vivid. They have a lot of visual power, if you will. So I do like working with cadmiums for especially the yellows. So on my palette here I have cadmium yellow medium. The yellow light is actually a just permanent color. It's meaning it's not cadmium. So non-cadmium reds and oranges and everything, they'll have more transparency to them. There'll be there'll be a lot that come that say they're opaque, but after you work with cadmium colors for a while, you'll realize that the cadmiums are really, really, really strong visually. But the problem with cadmiums is they're poisonous. So they do make hues. So whenever you see a paint that says like cadmium hue, what that means is it's not the actual color; it's the hue of the color. And so that's usually an indication of safety. And so if you see the hue label, you'll be either purchasing a color that is very, very similar to the real thing. But you'll find like that it won't be as strong, but flake white's like that. There's a lot of companies, I can't say that, but a lot of companies stopped making flake white. And some companies are making flake white hue now. But it's not the same. It doesn't work the same. Flake white's so unique in how it works. You really need it to be, and that's lead white. But it has some zinc white they mix with it. But, cadmium's the same. So just be aware of that too. So if you think you're getting a certain color, but it has hue in it, that means it's not the real thing. But if you are working with cadmiums and leads and cobalts and all those nice poisonous colors, be careful. So it is recommended that you wear gloves, especially if you're a messy, dirty painter. And I've come to know or realize, I guess, there's a certain type of person, they can't help themselves. You'll be, say you're working long next to them or something, and every time that person uses paint, they have it all over their face, all over their arms, it's in their hair, it's on, it's on their pants, it's everywhere. They just can't control it. They try and it just gets everywhere. And then you have other people that they don't get any oil paint on them at all. And so I'm kind of more in that group. So I don't wear gloves. I don't personally like gloves. It feels distracting when I work with gloves. So, I avoid using them. But I'm kind of a clean painter too, so I don't really get paint on my hands, and if I do, I try to wash my hands right away. So it's really just a matter of being conscious of how you're working. Be careful. Don't put brushes in your mouth. I used to do that when I was in high school and college. Got out of that habit. So try to avoid doing that. Because that's where you really get the bad effects of the paint or the toxicities. It goes right into your system, if you will. So now I'm going with kind of a light color, and I'm trying to get these roots in here. I'm using more of a yellow green, mainly because it's in the shadow. So these roots, even though that they're very light in the light, they are kind of a green color that still come across as light. I just have to keep on grabbing paint though. I have so much paint on here right now. That's why I let that go in the beginning. I left that space open. I didn't want to be competing with a lot of paint. Now another tool you can use for thin lines, like right here I'm using just a pointed or a round brush, and what I found is round brushes aren't really the greatest for a lot of line work. They can be, depending on how careful you are and how you load the brush. But what I've been finding is the flat head brushes tend to be a little bit better if you work with a flat head brush on its side. It creates kind of like a calligraphy, sharp line type effect. So you can get nice clean lines that way. The other thing that you might want to try if you're struggling with that is adopting mediums into your work. And some mediums, especially traditional medium, is much much more fluid. Like even liquid, for example, is pretty thick. But like traditional medium, it's almost like, it's kind of similar to water. So you can really thin out your paints, and the medium is also a binder. So it's going to protect those paints and keep a nice strong bind, if you will. So as it cures and sets, it's you don't have to worry about it cracking or anything. relatively in good shape. So it's, but you know, it is kind of difficult to have fine details sometimes because the round brushes, they tend to just splay out. You know, so that, you know, they're not very productive. And trying to get this natural look here too. There's a lot of in and out, like overlap with the roots here, depth wise. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna have to go back into the negative space here. And this is, you know, this also is a kind of a detail element that may sometimes be better to wait until the painting dries. You know, whenever you're dealing with so much paint, you're struggling with the detail. It's isolated enough where, you know, it's something that you could really work after the fact. Rather than trying to go back and forth. Yeah, another example of this is trees. Like if you see a hedge row of trees or something like that in the sky, if you're making that scene with wet on wet, it's sometimes very difficult because you have to kind of either you have to draw it perfect or paint it in perfect the first time. But it's always recommended to do the background first. So you would be doing the trees first, or I'm sorry, the sky first, and make sure you don't need to go back in. But then once you do the trees, the issue comes down to if you didn't do it perfectly, in the sense of taking care of that negative space, then you have to go back in to the sky to clean up. You know, and that's not ideal. And so. But so here what I'll do, I'll grab somewhere that dark, but the areas, for example, right here, and this can, you know, depending on, you know, this can look terrible sometimes. And it's one of those things where it's like it kind of gets out of control real quick, and then you lose your control, and then you lose your composure, and you can even panic or whatever, you know. And it's like, and then it gets even worse. And you know, the key is, you know, try to think of it natural. Don't overwork it. Leave it alone. You know, it's all about timing and your mind. You know, being okay with leaving it in certain states of finish. And again, if you get close, you know, to everything, then maybe just let it go. Let it dry. You have the structure there. And you can pop the high highlights here or there once it dries, and so you're not fighting the mixing and all that of the wet paint. Yeah, so I'll leave that alone right there, and then I'll move on here to the highlights. Now with the highlights in this one, I'm going to go with a much more just pure blue. I could probably use the same batch I had here. Too much red in it. There we go. I gotta keep on remembering my stick is in the way there all the time. There we go. Just a little bit of pure blue there. Well, it's got a lot of white in it, but the nice thing about the oil paints is because of their pure nature, they're so dark, for at least the transparent colors. That's, adding just a little bit of white to them, you can really get that, those intense blues or, reds and stuff. From that. Once you get into the third pass here, I always think about texture. Because the nice thing is you already have the color underneath it. So, in a lot of cases you did that in the first layer. So you don't have to cover everything. You just have to texture it. This thing, it's kind of like unraveling and falling apart here. So I'm just, adding texture. Trying to stick with the tone that I put down. It's a kind of a beat up onion. It's been in the onion jar or bowl for about 2 months. So they do hold up pretty good. Don't know about you, but the ones in the bag seem to get rotten pretty quick. Okay, now, also look for things like reflective light. Like I just saw here that on this side, it's catching the light of the box there. It's warmer though. Okay. All right. The other areas, in a lot of this too, I'm just thinking of it as in terms of just kind of a little bit here and there. I'm not thinking of it in terms of broad coverage. I'm just adding color here and there where I'm seeing it really intensely. The idea is at the end of the day, you're going to have, or it'll all come together. And hopefully, feel natural. I do need to brighten that more, though. Let's see here. It's almost got a lot of yellow in it. I'll do that at the end. I'll have to clean my palette again. You don't need a lot of liquid. That's another thing. I catch an awful lot of people using way too much liquid when they work. I mean, I guess that is a style. Yeah, you'll see these paintings. I usually see it though more with traditional medium, where the artist will almost pool the application of the medium. They'll almost treat it kind of like watercolor, but they're literally pooling their application so that as the paint sets, it's actually kind of creating like a resin layer, if you will. You know, kind of like the resin tables that we have and stuff like that. But they're using more like the traditional medium for that. Yeah, it can have a pretty cool look if you do it right. But for the most part, you don't really need to use that much, medium. You just need a little bit. I just dip the tip of my brush in as I work, to mix the paint and stuff. I do notice too, after doing these videos, I have a tendency to get in the zone like an hour and a half into, talk less, and playing paint more. Okay, so I'll leave that be for now. This side is kind of, now that I say that, the side's a little distracting. Let me just smooth that out. Well, there is one thing, now that it's happened, it's probably a good thing to talk about here real quick. Every once in a while when you're painting, from life, especially in nature, you're going to run into these structures. The clouds are a good example. The cloud will just look weird. It's like, it's not that you're painting it wrong. It does look like that, but it just looks weird. It throws the composition off, and it feels more like a mistake, that the artist did or something like that. In cases like that, I do just recommend just making it look more natural, whatever you have to do, even though that's not what you're seeing. It's just that it's too distracting for somebody who doesn't know what it actually looks like. It's kind of hard to interpret as for the audience. So, okay, so at this point now, I'm gonna start going for finish, and so I'm gonna go to the table here, and I'm just going to focus on the darks up front. So there's a lot of little, I'm going to use a little more shortened mark making, ideally more textural. the paint has stiffened up a little bit, so it's easier to work. But again, just keep in mind that's temporary, so if you add more than a few brush strokes on there, it's going to get sloppy again. If you had like all day to work, it's a different process. Because like hour 5 and hour 7, hour 6 or whatever, you're gonna find that it's the painting itself is much easier to work. Different visual things happen in the application. What I'm doing here is really just a very brief painting. I'm trying to give it as much variety as I can in depth, but it is kind of quickly done, for the camera in a lot of ways. And a lot of these that I do, if I see something after it dries or whatever, I'll go back into it, clean it up. I'll take a picture of the still life when I'm done here. And that way I have something to look at where I can make adjustments. But I try not to do too much, just simple adjustments, mainly because if you once the painting dries, once you start making adjustments, I have found that if you don't do it simply, like just a highlight or a shadow there, you kind of have to go back into the entire process, meaning you find yourself kind of repainting everything, which becomes arduous. So it's try to do as much as you can when you're doing your original setting there, but you'll find that like certain areas you can't darken anymore, or you can't get it any lighter, because the paint's too wet. Those are okay. Let it dry. You can get that done when it dries. But if you're leaving like a large area to redo or something like that, there's a very good chance that you'll be basically painting that completely over. Just because once you start working back into it, you're going to find that the paint's not looking in place. It'll look different. So basically you end up doing the everything again. Now the one key when you're reworking, it's recommended to oil out, as they say. So, and some people will cover it thinly with like linseed oil or something, but usually, at least the way I interpret the saying is, just take a little, like for me, liquid or your medium, and when you're working an area, just cover it with the medium first. And what that'll do is it'll kind of harmonize everything a little bit, because the medium will give it a sheen, but it'll also, when you paint with it, the paint will not look so artificially new or different. It'll give it more of that natural appearance when you apply the medium again. So it does help quite a bit. And it's never the end of the world. If something doesn't work out, it's okay. You can just do another, or try it again later. Get some sleep, as they say. For something that's meant to be relaxing, I do see that art creates a lot of stress when you're trying to get something perfect or do something a certain way and it's not working out for you. it has this tendency to really eat at you. Do the best you can. Try not to let it ruin your day. And think of the others that are around you. You don't want to upset them. So the other thing I'm looking at here when I'm adding these colors, I'm trying to also include temperature. So if the initial shadow, I had a little bit of temperature work there, and now I'm going back in and making this warmer on the box within the shadow, but it does have like a reflective light, so the warmth does kind of fluctuate a little bit as far as the strength. So it's, there's still a lot of coolness, in other words, in there. A lot of times you will see kind of like whenever an object touches the ground, you do have a tendency to have a little line, shadow type thing setting. But again, don't be afraid to use the pure colors. Alizarin crimson will really pop that over a blue, and sometimes vice versa. Sometimes a blue is better than the red alizarin for doing it. It all depends, a dark green, in some cases. It all depends on the colors that are in the scene and how you are using those to work off of each other. One of the things I do like about working the way that I am here is, as the painting evolves, in a lot of cases, you'll find that you're not really repainting everything each time. You're just adding little elements here and there. So it kind of, to me, it's much more freeing of a process. And as far as my palette goes, I when you're mixing these things, you kind of create all these different areas where you can regather. Like this was kind of a disaster in here, but there's these little pockets that you can take from and add to, and and so it kind of creates an assortment of choice in a way. I am jumping around a little bit, though. I should be working on the box. Go back to these here. I haven't gotten my shadows done yet. And again, try not to always keep in mind the cross contour, that, which is kind of difficult when you're like, this, it's a flat surface, but it's also wood, really rough wood at that. It's that old wood that has a texture to it. But you don't want to just kind of create a line there. That doesn't complement the surface structure. And it's a rainy day here, so it's actually night. But it's raining outside, which is kind of nice. So adding some pure red light into the back of the shadow here. On this side, anyhow. There's a lot of light reflections coming from these two guys on the left, lighting up the shadow here. And then I'm going to add some of this yellow into it as well. Just a little bit. Try to blend it. Bring it into the blue. And then there's actually almost like a king's blue on the side edge. Add a little bit of blue to that dark back that I did earlier. More of like a purple now. Bring this out. This has a lot of blue. And the same on this side. And again, just don't be afraid to take your time, look for the color. The color is not going to stand up and jump out at you. You got to kind of look for it, but it's there. And it is important, really, at least my experience is when you look at work that uses color purely, or relatively purely, where it's obvious, it really adds a lot of life to the artwork. So if you haven't, started trying to include color, I would recommend it. Um, Use less white if you can. Think of how you can do it with colors. One of the best things I did, in my drawing as an artist, was pastels. Because pastels, they're all, it's like you got these big chunks of color. You don't have this ability to blend as you work, really, unless you use oil pastel. Well, I mean, soft pastels you can, I guess. But you'll find with pastels that if you do that, you lose control very quickly. It just turns into a big muddy mess. So you got to kind of start figuring out how to use pure color with color to get the effects that you're going for. And because of that, the images are really intense, or they can be. But it then adds to your experience with paint. You start realizing that you can be more colorful in your paintings. Less mixing, if you will. Trying to mix less, bring things forward more. Okay, go for a smaller brush. I have to mix my brushes here, but I am getting close to my final pass here. So, again, I don't want to, work this nonstop. I want to find a place to end it, and the one of the things about that, though, is it's letting go, being okay with it. It's okay where it is, and then when I wake up tomorrow, make note of things if that are obvious that I might need to improve on, work more. Okay, so I mixed a bright kind of like peach color, if you will, and I'm going to do this for trying to get some of the highlights here established. I'm going to start in the box. If you notice, I haven't gone into the background. I only did 2 passes in the background, and I'm okay with that. But what that did was it kind of helped set that back there. It stays in the back. I'm kind of going for this edge here. Also, the highlight on the box I haven't really developed fully. And this will help bring it forward. When you want to bring depth of space to things, especially flat surfaces, the key is really working with saturation of color. So like this color I have, you can see how it glows in comparison to what's underneath of it. And it does have a lot of white in it, but it's not the white that's doing that. It's the cadmium red and yellow that I have in it. White tends to set back. So if you're using like pure white, it would look really faded. And when we talk about color, that's the other thing, as an incentive, to experiment with it more, because it will bring a lot of life to your artwork. And less blending, these later stages to just think of the mark to mark. So whenever you blend, it really kind of flattens itself. It's true with drawing too. If you're blending with drawing, you're always going to have kind of like a fuzzy drawing. You know, at a certain point, you got to stop blending and just do marks. Let them lay there. You know, resist that urge to touch it or whatever. And I'm hoping this video is much clearer than the other videos I've done. I think I talked about this earlier already, but I found that the focus of my camera, I was using the kind of like autofocus feature, and I thought it was clear, but there's like a blurriness nonetheless. And then and you know, when you're talking about an inch in space, it's kind of hard to tell sometimes. And so this area was really in focus. So what I did this time is I actually took a piece of paper with words that had headings, but then it also had medium size and really fine print type on it. So I was able to kind of go through and focus to first the headings, and then from the headings I focused to the medium type, and then I focused to the fine type that was on the page with the camera manually. So I took it out of autofocus. And I'm hoping that did the trick. It's kind of hard, especially if you have, like, my eyes aren't, I had cataracts, my cataracts, cataract surgery removed or whatever last year. And I noticed that my ability to focus is limited now since then. It's more like everything's in stages. Like at this depth I can see really good, at this depth I can see good, at that depth it's a little blurry. And then the camera, the detail work digitally, I've been finding it's been really difficult to tell if it's in focus or not. So, which is a little bit of a bummer. It's just another sign of getting older. But hey, that's life. Okay. A little bit more back here. I am trying to control the marks a little bit here so that the detail is being more limited in the background. But you do kind of have to present that depth of space thing. So now I'm going to bring just some more pure orange, or orange red light. It's very orange looking to me, and then I'm just going to complement that in certain areas where I see that it is warmer, and that'll help boost it and visually bring it forward. But it's not everywhere, and again, you want to avoid that tendency to, if you're not careful, it turns too much into a recipe. and it, in a way, it flattens the image because you kind of applied it everywhere. And so resist that urge. Other things to practice for that idea of like texture and dynamics is grass. So, like painting, drawing grass, really look at the pattern. Let's see, I gotta check on something real quick. Right back. Okay. It's really hot and humid, and I have a air conditioner going in the other room, and there's a bucket we have that fills up with water. Just wanted to make sure it wasn't overflowing. So yeah, so now I'm just taking that crimson up here, certain areas on the edge to pop that shelf. Give it some extra darkness in certain areas. And dropping a little bit of blue in here or there helps pop things. So again, color, color is your friend. And then I guess I'll just start addressing everything here as I see it. A little bit here, a little bit there. Until everything kind of feels more in place. Okay. I'm going to use the red light with the alizarin. Put a little liquid to it. I really want to embellish this red onion here with the highlights. And I did smooth this out, mainly because it's literally kind of like, I don't know, it's weird. It's almost like a birch tree shedding its skin on that side. It doesn't really have any structure to it. Okay. Come out with the alizarin. A little too heavy. One of the things I don't have out of my palette right now is magenta. So that would have really benefited here. And actually, that is a color I don't have actually right now. I have something close though. So I think I will get that out. So every once in a while, it's what I find is there's certain colors that you just can't mix really. You can get, similar, but so sometimes you just have to kind of go with another color out of the tube just for that color. And that is what I need to do, I think. So, but before I do, let me use, because the colors are similar here for the yellow that I have to do, the white tomato, or the white onions. So it's more like a cedar. It's like very sandy. Really a lot down here. Go really dark with that. And if you can, always try to out-color the objects that are in back of it. So this front object, in other words, I'm going to try to boost the color even more, make it more red, so that comes forward a little bit over the background. So again, it's that idea of the using the saturation levels of the color intensities to help bring things forward. And then I'm going to come over here to the green again. And then add a little texture. Okay. Whew. So it's really just that yellow. It's got this very acidic yellow. Okay. And bring in highlights for the stem. there. If I had a little bit more patience, I would mix out. Oh, where'd that come from? Mix out more gradations. But I don't. I'm gonna wrap this up here very quickly. So I'm going to come back into these guys, take some liquid, try to do some highlights here, just a couple of them. And again, try to look for the pattern. So keep looking at your source here. And, you know, that's what's going to give it that natural kind of feel to it or look. Okay. I'll take that same yellow, add it to some areas of highlight, and the white onions. You know, and I have found the color to settle a little bit too in the drying. You know, you might see a color that you might be uncomfortable with. It stands out too much or something. Let it dry. See what happens. It might settle in. And finally, I gotta get that color. Where did I put it? It's on here somewhere. Maybe I just used it. There it is. It's a little tube I got. And it's a rose color. But I've had this tube for like 20 years. That's how long, how often I use it. It's a really small tube. It's like one of the European tubes. I hardly ever use it, but it's a color by Rembrandt. I'm just gonna add a little bit of white to it, but it's like that purplish pink that I'm just not, it's that nice intense color that I'm looking for this guy. Just not getting it with my normal mix. And that'll really pop up those highlights that we find in these red onions. And it's not everywhere, it's just, in a few places. It is down here a little bit. And the reflective light. So the other thing too is I'm speaking very softly because people are sleeping. So I might have to start doing these recordings during the day so I can talk loudly. I'm going to put a little bit of that out here. Just a little bit. That'll help it connect the viewer through the work a little bit better. Okay, now the tricky part. The yellow highlight on the purple ball. So that's actually blue first. So I'm going to start with white. Add some of the blue. A little bit of this rose. And bring some more white into it. There we go. Okay. So here I'm gonna use the purple first to try to get the highlights. And maintain the nature of the skin. And then this. Okay, and then this is the yellow. I think I have to use paint's all getting dirty. There we go. More of a lemon yellow. There we go. And finally, some blue. Oh, to get a clean brush. Okay. Okay. And it's getting real wet here. So I think I'll leave that alone. Alright. And then I just got to do the highlights for the white onions here. And for those, I'm going to take a little bit of this rose with the phthalo blue. That's reading more as a gray, really. I might actually have to just use the rose, the white. Here we go. A smidge of liquid. There we go. Just enough to pop it. And some of the top. There we go. And I think I'm going to leave that as is for now. There's a lot of things I can do here, but it is getting a little late, and it is a faster painting after all. I do have to increase the highlight between here a little bit. Okay, we'll call it for that. Alright guys, thank you for sitting through and watching all the development of everything. If this was to dry, I would go in and rework a little bit of the mid-tones up in here. I have a little bit too much contrast going on there. It needs some mid-tones. With the red onion as well, there's some development back here, but it's getting too wet, and rather than just keep on throwing paint on it and just let it dry. So I would do another approach on the highlights here in the front too. But for the most part, it's pretty good, so I'm going to leave it at that. So thank you for joining. Click the subscribe button, hit like, all that kind of stuff. I'm going to try to do this once a week, once every 10 days. So hopefully you'll see more from me here, and I'll try to do something different each time, so give it a little bit of variety. Okay. All right. Thank you. Goodbye.